Okay.
We're live?
Yep, we're live.
Hi, everyone. We are about to get started soon. I'm just doing the final marketing as always. Today will be a fun one as we get to talk about color. And it's something that I've been going crazy with the past few days. So I can share some of the knowledge with you guys. And I feel like the more that I try to understand color, the larger spectrum of understanding color becomes. So I'm trying to bridge this gap, and I want to share with you guys what I've learned so that I can keep creating this color course and get that out in the near future. But as we do with every live stream in the beginning, if you want to put where you're watching from, and then Joe will do the quick shout outs while I do the final marketing push.
We've already got some people giving their shout outs.
Awesome.
Divine says hello from Poland.
Hello.
Christy McAfee's back, says hello from Portland, Oregon.
Hello.
Actually, I have a cousin who's in Portland. And then we have a couple people who are just saying hey. Oh, and then Google Hangout just updated. It was like, just like 6 of them. And by 6, I mean like 10. Holy cow. Jordan Nelson's back, says hello from cloudy day in Indy.
Oh, hello.
I think I'm going to get this wrong. Azara from Florida. Benedict is back as well. It says, hi, Tim. I'm awake and ready.
Wonderful.
Oh, man, they just keep popping up. Oliver Wales from London. S. Matthews from Spain says hi. Renato from Italy. Caroline from Quebec. Alex from Greece.
Hello, everyone.
Joku Boss from Lithuania. I probably got that totally wrong. I'm sorry. Matt Harris from Australia. Ian from Canada. And then Luis is here once yet again. Hello, Luis.
Hello again.
From a typically wet England. Is England usually wet?
I think so.
I think it's like, is that like, what's the state that always rains? Is that Seattle?
Yeah.
It always rains in Seattle. I am not says hello from the Kingdom of Sweden.
The entire kingdom?
The entire kingdom.
Well, hello, Prince.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
Good.
All right, now I'm ready. You ready?
All right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CG Cookie 2D Digital Art live stream. And we do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, -5 GMT. And usually the topic is posted about an hour or two beforehand. Today was a little later because I was so wrapped up in the difference between RGB and CMYK and recreating that. So I got a little sidetracked, but we are here today with a color live stream. And as with every live stream that we do with CG Cookie, if you have any question pertaining to digital art, even if it's not what I'm working on, feel free to ask them in the questions, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. Usually there's a lot, so we try to get to them as effectively as possible. But if your question isn't answered, just know we do these every Wednesday and try to ask it again. And more than likely, we will ask it the second week. And whatever we talk about during the stream will be uploaded to the community post afterwards. So any books that we talk about, any links, or any specific artists that we talk about, we will share after. Okay, Joe, did you want to share your book really quick?
Oh, yeah. I recently got a book, an art book, because of I was looking at the Knights of Iris, which is the Fire Emblem concept art book, and I was like, okay, who is this artist who's doing this stuff? So I picked up, I think his name is Yusuke Kiyosaki, right? And it's a very awesome illustrated book. right? And I was like, well, I really need to support this artist because I really love what they do. Like, it's just like I'm a huge anime fan, so seeing all this stuff like so dynamic, and like the one thing I can't do yet is draw hair for anime. So I just sit there every night and I just study how to draw hair. And I think this guy also worked on I can't think of the actual game name, but it came out a couple of years ago, and they had really crazy weapon designs in it. I'll try to figure out what game it was, and I'll post in the link at the end on the YouTube page. But yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I got a really sweet. Since it was my birthday, we did my birthday party a couple weeks ago. Tim got me this really sweet Boba Fett figurine from Square Enix. So check that out, everybody. Isn't that awesome? So cool. All right. Okay.
I like the play. Okay, I guess the only few things that I wanted to share with you guys are if you don't have a pocket color wheel, this is actually pretty useful. I've been kind of staring at it the past couple of days. And before we even start the stream, I want you guys to know there's 2 color wheels that are in existence that are widely generalized as acceptable. And this is the first one. So the one that we grew up with, or that at least I grew up with, was, I guess, the traditional painter color wheel. And that's where blue and orange are opposites, red and green are opposites, and yellow and blue, or yellow and purple, or violet, I should say. And it's been really confusing trying to figure out what the actual color wheel is, because then after reading James Gurney's Color and Light, his section on color wheels, he brings up a Munsell color wheel and then even further complicates it with a Wurmby color wheel. And pretty much a Wurmby color wheel is the most accurate for digital painters and what we do. And that's where it's not green and red are opposites, but rather red and cyan are opposites, and blue and yellow and magenta and green. And I'm going to do my best to explain every complicated idea that's given in On Color in the color course that we're creating. And just know that if it's confusing for you, it's confusing for everyone. I don't think I've met anyone that feels really like learning color was simple or an easy task. So even with this live stream today, I want to cover a few of the basic mistakes that I see, but this won't cover the vast majority of color theory because there's so much to it. And it's been really fun learning about it, but I really do think it takes the extra effort on the artist's part to really dive deeper into color. So as much as I can teach you just from talking about and showing you, I think it takes the extra step of you guys actually experimenting with it yourself to really let it resonate with you guys and understand how color works. Okay, and I think that's all I wanted to share before we go ahead and get started. Yes, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my blank screen here. Okay, so I would say there's about 3 things that I want to cover most. Oh, you know what? Let me make this a wide scale canvas instead of a vertical. There we go. Okay. So the first thing that I want to touch on, I think, is the biggest mistake I see with color, especially with younger artists, or at least the biggest mistake I always saw when working with students at the college I taught at for 2 semesters. So let me go ahead and do an example of that. Okay. So when you choose a color, and as I explained in the color course, I don't like using the term color because when I think color, it actually is the hue, saturation, and brightness of a color, of what we assume or generalize as a color. So like I'm going to say red, but usually that refers to the hue. But for the purpose of this live stream, it's where I'm just going to call it red. So for this red, whenever an artist wanted to go lighter or darker with this particular color, they would have a black on one side And you know what? I'm going to do this on a grayscale background rather than a white, so it's easier to see the hue identities that are going on. All right, so they would have black on one side, and on the other side, they would choose white. And then to get the in-betweens, they would literally blend toward black for the darks and white for the shadows. And the in-betweens would look something like this. Actually, I'm going to use a soft edge brush for this to get a clear gradient going on. And same with down here. Now, this isn't one of those things where it's wrong to instinctively think that, because when we think light and shadow, I guess in the primary sense, white would be light and black would be shadow. But from this point forward, and whenever you're working on your pieces, I want you to now see white as adding brightness. I'm going to add that on the side. And black, there's no brightness. Okay, so before I get into color shifting, let me go ahead and do a quick sphere example. Okay, so let's say that this was an apple. Maybe I'll do a quick outline of an apple. If you can imagine, the stem would be like here. So the best way that I learned how to understand color and how it's affected by light is to think that the apple itself has a hue identity. So let's say, even with like a subtle value placement here, I'm going to keep it as if it was placed in like an overcast lit area. So there's bounce lighting everywhere. The only thing that are really prevalent are the occlusion shadows, or the shadows that are going to be there regardless of the light source, unless if it's really intense. And this gives us a better idea of the shaping of the object. Something like that. So now, when a light source is added to this apple, let's say that the light source could only reach to about this section of the apple, and that would be the terminator. So this line that I just drew is called the terminator. And if you want to think of it as the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, that's totally cool by me. As long as you can remember, that's where it ends. Oh, I'm going to spell that wrong. I'll put that same reference. So now when we add the lighting, initially what we want to do is and this is the incorrect way of doing it. So what I'm doing right now is not what I want you guys to do. So what we would do then is we would add the light source. Oops, I don't want to go that bad. Is this on the, okay, it's underneath, good. And then we would grab a darker value of that same color, and then we would put it in the shadow. And there might be some mixing in between, but even this is incorrect. Let me grab a soft edge so that you can really smooth it out here. Mixer brush. And the reason that this is so wrong is because then we lose the hue identity of the actual object or the subject matter that we're working on. It's so clouded and muddy from the brightness and the shadows that we added that we lose what color it actually is, and that's bad. We want the viewer to to know what color it is, even with all the lighting and the shadow we add. So that's why when you go to a rock concert or a concert hall where it's completely dark, but then they only have colored lights that light the stage, even though their skin might appear to be like a blue or a purple or a red, we know that the actual skin color is not the light that's hitting the face. It's more of the actual skin color of a person. So for doing this, it loses the hue identity, just kind of like it does at a rock concert, but there's a huge difference, and I'll explain that. So this is the way I don't want you guys to think about adding brightness and shadows. So I'm going to put this on the side here. I'm going to move this over. Make a copy of this apple.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So now let's try that again. So we still have the same terminator, but this time, rather than adding a shadow value, let's go ahead and add just the light value, and then it would cut off right at the terminator. Now, mind you, I'm going to show you why even this way it's more correct than the first one, but there's still more that we can do. We're going to go in stages, so hopefully you guys can maybe catch yourself at which stage you usually kind of fall off on, and why, and really think about why do you do that. Okay, so now on our apple, when I turn off that terminator layer, you can see how it's very distinctive where the light and shadow values are, but I'm not amplifying the shadows. Because when you think about it, if without the lighting, if this was an overcast setting, it's already in a shadow. So when I add a light source, we might get a cast shadow, but the area that was already in shadow wouldn't multiply its shadow. So we wouldn't add black down here. Oop, let me close this really quick. So it wouldn't multiply the shadow. If anything, the light would just be more prevalent. It would be focused on top of the surface of the apple. But this way is not the way I want you to do it either. We're getting closer, but that's not the way I want you to do it either. So I'm going to move these up. Maybe I'll move this to the side too. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is choosing the colors for your lighting. So before on the second apple, I was still using the same range of red to white and red to black. And that's not what I want you guys to do. Now, mind you, what I'm about to do usually isn't as dramatic. I'm going to really push the colors on this one to make it very clear on how to do what is called hue shifting. But it looks and adds so much more harmony to the final result of the piece. Okay, so when I'm opening my color picker, and you know what, I'm gonna actually share my screen really quick so you can see the color picker as well here.
I'm back, by the way.
All right, move this out of the way. Okay, so when I pull up my color picker, and this is gonna be your best friend. If you really wanna understand color, really start to use and get more familiar with the color picker tool. And to get there, all you do is you choose the foreground color on the bottom of the toolbar, and pretty much every digital art software has something similar to this. All right, so right now we have our red. Rather than going white to black and sticking within the same hue, we're gonna do what is called hue shifting. So for my shadows, I can still go with a darker value, but rather than just staying in that same hue, I'm also going to bend it slightly toward a shadow color, which in this case would be more of a blue or a purple. These are cooler colors. So I'm going to put that down here. And I'm going to do the same for my light. So I'm going to grab that red again, and I'm going to make it a little more saturated. Although, depending on the light source, this is another big question. Do I make areas that are in light more saturated or less saturated? And that's a good question. And it really depends on your light source. If you have a really brilliant white light source, oftentimes that washes out the color a little bit. It'll get brighter, but sometimes the intensity of the saturation or the chroma gets washed out. So sometimes you do get less saturated with the light. But oftentimes, right where the light meets the shadow is where there is a saturation that is more intense than the pure light. So it all depends on the light source and how far away it is from the subject matter. And there isn't one easy way to explain if it gets more saturated or less saturated. But just take it one piece at a time. So now here, I'm going to bend it. Let's see here. I don't want to go too extreme. Let's say it's like that. Oops. You know what? I'm going to go a little less saturated. Okay, so now I'm going to build up some in-betweens. Okay, and the reason that we're getting kind of a cool look down here as opposed to up here is because we're using what are called split complementary colors. So if red was our, oh, I'm sorry, no. I'm reading my little color wheel in front of me. I'm gonna butcher this. Analogous colors?
That's right.
Perfect. So since we're using analogous, man, that one's a tough one for me. We're using colors in the same spectrum, the same feel of our original color. And that's why it feels like a nice gradient from the light to the darker. So let's go ahead and get our apple back up here. Or back down here, I should say. All right, so same thing. I'm gonna add just a little bit of this shadow color. Not working, there we go. Now, mind you, this definitely borders more on fantastical coloring, but it's good to know how to create harmony in your piece, even though it might not be 100% hyperrealism. Because I don't think hyperrealism should always be the goal. I think it's good to understand how like lighting and color work in the real world, but then to create harmony in your specific piece as an artist, I think takes a next step of really working with understanding color relationships and the palettes that you're using. On this side, I'm going to add this orange right up against to this terminator. Now, rather than using white and then mixing it with this orange and doing like another path here, I don't want to even do that. I want my highlight to stand on its own. And usually highlights aren't a pure white because there's nothing that's pure white or pure black in nature. It's just with a digital format, we're able to kind of reproduce that. But I don't want you guys feeling like you have to rely on white for highlight and black for shadow. But with the apple case, the white, or this very bright value here, acts as a highlight. So I'm trying not to mix it in with the orange, but rather let it lay on top of the surface as if it was a texture all its own. Okay, so now there's one more thing though I want to look at. So while this apple is getting to the point of working more with color, let's go ahead and do one more step. And this step involves bounce lighting and understanding why the area right after the terminator is actually the darkest part of the shadow. So now without a cast shadow, it still looks a bit strange. Let me go ahead and add a shadow underneath of our apple here. Now, this is something that I read yesterday, and it's something that I want to test because the idea was that if you light an apple that is primarily red, there will be more cyan or green tints in the shadow. And that's something that I don't want to teach until I feel like I experimented with it myself. But I do have a general trust of what I find from these artists that I respect. So I feel like it is accurate. I just want to go ahead and test it out for myself before I tell you guys. Let's hide that terminator. So something like this. So even though I probably could spend a lot more time on this apple refining and making it look nice, you can see the difference between apple 1 and apple 2. And that's because apple 2 feels more vibrant. There's more colors that are catching your eye. There's more interest to it. Where apple 1, you're not even sure what the color of the apple is. But on apple 2, you can get a good sense that this is a red apple. Okay, so now let's apply it to more of a bigger stage here, or a bigger idea. I'm going to push this to the side. Let's bring in a character sketch.
Let me know when you want me to start throwing questions your way because they're starting to get backed up here.
Is it overwhelming?
There's quite a bit.
Okay, I'll just start off by saying I'm going to color for, I have two examples that I want to work on for the rest of the stream. The first one is skin and working with isolated saturations. And then the second will be working with a color that is seen as more vibrant, but in a way that's more muted and it works. So with red and her hair, I'm going to have this top half and her hair that's hanging off the side be red, but I'm going to have it fit with the rest of the character without it like begging for your attention, essentially. So you have to have that, you have to have your colors working together rather than one just like demanding all the attention from the viewer. Okay, so now you can start asking questions. And you know what? I'm going to switch back to just one screen.
All right, these kind of questions go hand in hand. It says, how do you approach choosing good and harmonious colors for costume and character designs? And there's another question that says, can you talk about how colors relate to the attitude of a character, like the meaning of the colors?
Yeah. So as you might know, all colors are relative to the viewer. And what that means is what I think of red and my association with red might be different than what your association with red is. So for me, I love isolated reds, and it doesn't, for a lot of people, it represents like fast food or evil, like the devil, or in some cases, fast. And that's why it's with fast food, because it's quick. It makes your blood temperature rise. But for me, I see red as very calming in a sense that I had a lot of moments or memories in my life with the color red. And I know this sounds strange, but there were a lot of moments where I really appreciated seeing red. And that's why I have a different, when I see it in pieces, I'm immediately gravitated toward it. So in the question, oh, did you select it? I can't see it.
No, I didn't select it. It's the top one. It's the plus 18 books.
Oh, geez. You guys were really wanting to know this one. So then when I choose colors for my character, so let's say, let me see if I can pull one up really quick. guess I can show you one of what I've been working on. But I want to focus on red on the very left-hand side here. With this character, I wanted to work with more earth tone, so with her body and what clothes that she's wearing. Now, mind you, I used a lot of fantasy coloring in this, especially with like the back leg and the yellow, but I wanted it to complement the purple shine on the front part of her pants. But if you're able to really look at it, you could probably tell that her clothing is very earth toned. It's very muted in a way. And all of the brown that complements her, from her boots, her gloves, and her tank top and the shoulder pad, everything is very earth based. The only thing that is very vibrant and very saturated is her hair. And I wanted that to kind of speak to her character, that she came from a very normal upbringing. She's very rooted in her morals and beliefs, but there's something about her that she has an edge. There's a spark to her, and that's why I wanted her hair to kind of be the vocal point of her character design. And it's very true. So I love this question because I think it's very true. When designing characters, you have to be very conscious of the colors you're choosing to really make the colors kind of tell another story of the character rather than just what the character is wearing or whether or not they're like a knight or a warrior. I think there's more to it than just that. So the other thing I guess you could focus on is what we kind of learned growing up with like kids movies. There's certain colors that are associated with good guys and colors that are associated with bad guys. So villains are often, actually I want to find my little palettes here. So when you think bad or evil, there's usually a green, a purple, a black, or a red. And those are like, for some reason, universally seen as like maniacal, malicious, villainous. So this is the evil box. And then for the heroes, I don't really want to draw gold, but we can think gold, and in some cases, I actually think a more foresty green is seen as heroic. Brown, and if you really want to think about it, brown is just a desaturated orange or red. I don't really see brown as a real color, or real in the sense of it being one of the pure colors. And then typically white. So these are the ones that you may see, or even blue. Actually, blue is probably one of the bigger ones.
Blue is huge.
I put that in the middle. So these are the ones that you may see with more of the hero characters, but hero characters I feel like have a wider range of colors, but it's the evil ones that I feel like are usually confined to a smaller palette. All right. So let me reread the question one more time. How do you prioritize? So yeah, I guess be very conscious of the colors you're choosing and how that will be relative to the viewer. Because what you might think of a color might not be what another person thinks, but you want to get the point across. So sometimes you have to think of what is the mass majority perception on specific colors. So like white and gold, if you see it in a video game, you might think royalty or some kind of a higher class citizen, something where it relates, but something like brown and like rust color, you would think more poor, or you could think more like steampunk or rustic. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with painting the skin on her, and then we'll talk about how to do this. So I know there's a lot of questions, so I feel bad if I don't try to balance talking and answering questions.
Are there any good tips on using muted, muddy, dull colors without making it looking as depressing or lifeless?
I never find that true. I think artists are afraid of that for that reason. But usually I feel like the ones that are muted have a stronger control of their colors. And then where they do add hints of saturation, it really makes them pop. And only when I see like monochromatic color schemes do I think it entails the more depressing or lifeless look. But I don't want you guys associating muted or dull colors with it being depressing or lifeless. Because I love when I see artists using it and then they have like pops of color here and there. So without it making it look depressing. So for that, what we're going to do even with this character is exactly what your question is going to entail. So for her head area, so I'm going to work in like this region. I'm going to use mainly muted or unsaturated colors. And then I'm going to have her eye color itself be the thing that is saturated. And it really brings it all together. The contrast between her eye color and her skin, even though the skin covers the majority of it and it would be considered more dull, since the eyes are so vibrant and have that saturation to it, it complements it well. It like balances it to a point where it doesn't look lifeless then.
But I guess, how can I get a sense for the relation between colors? Colors interact with surrounding colors, but how can I get a good feeling for it?
Okay, this is a good question. And I feel like I almost need to do a demo. So pretty much, or actually no, I don't. So pretty much colors interact with surrounding colors based on contrast. So that's why in this example over here, that's why this worked so well, is because it was a minimal gradual contrast between one hue to the next. And that's why things like, then let's say we added, I'm gonna add like a vibrant green next to the red. Then this contrast, immediately your eye is no longer drawn to this gradual contrast, but rather this direct heavy contrast between the red and the green. It demands the viewer's attention. Our eyes are so intrigued by that heavy contrast in hue. So when you're choosing colors, be very aware of color opposites or complementary colors and where you're placing them, because oftentimes our eye is just generally attracted to that. Now, mind you, you also have to pay attention to the saturation and value or the brightness that you're adding to your colors. So like that green is really distracting, but let's say I chose a green of the same value. Let me get rid of that green. This one's not as demanding because it's the same value. So actually I could even do, hold on. I'll do a little test down here. Okay, I'm gonna erase that green. Okay, so the red's gonna be the same throughout. Now I'm gonna choose a green that is of the same value and the same brightness. I'm gonna place them next to each other. And now I'm gonna choose that green and I'm gonna make it less saturated, but at the same value and at the same hue. And then lastly, I'm gonna make it the brightest that I can and the most saturated at the same hue. So I'm not changing anything but the value and the saturation. Now, which one demands your attention most? And the answer should be the bottom one. And that's because the contrast between the two, we're playing off of hue contrast, brightness contrast, and saturation contrast. So when you're choosing colors, oftentimes we only associate contrast with the actual hue of the color. And it's a good start, but you're only working with one. Why work with one when you can work with all three? So then you can start to play and have fun with, well, not only do we get a hue contrast, but we can also get a saturation contrast, where now the red seems more vibrant just in comparison. And then lastly, that's when this is where it can become an eyesore, because then when we want people to look at certain areas, we add saturation, we add brightness. But I want to kind of show you guys how you could actually use desaturated colors to push the vibrancy in the colors you already have in your palette. So even this green, I could push the desaturation even further, put it on this side. Oop, let me make it a tad darker. And I know it kind of mixes in with that gray, so let me, now let me try it one more time. I think that green could be brighter. So it almost looks gray because of how far it's desaturated, but it's not a pure gray. Can make it a touch more green. But you can see how just by these two colors here, the red seems more interesting, even though in the bottom panel, the green is far more eye-grabbing, but it's only because of the saturation and the brightness. I didn't edit the hue at all, so it's the same green. And that's why I don't like using color terms. I like using the terms hue, brightness, and saturation, because there's such an emphasis on understanding color. You really have to understand those three concepts. All right, so now I'm going to get back to the face, and we can answer another question.
Sydney Kruger asks, do you paint eyebrows the exact same color as the hair?
Sometimes. It depends on the character, but that's a good observation where not everyone shares the same the eyebrow color as they do their hair color. And I think that's especially true with sometimes blonde people have darker eyebrows. It might be more of a brown or a deeper sandy brown, but their hair might be more of a blonde, a more pure blonde.
Linebow says, hey, can you talk about the difference of the color of the light throughout the day and night? Would sunrise and sunsets be more yellow and warm, and would the night and midday be blue and colder?
Generally, yes. Think with sunset more red, but for the most part, yes. And then nighttime would be perceived as more blue, more cold.
I have no idea how to say this person's name. Jadasaiki? So can you show us how you build your palette, showing the color picker step by step, please?
Yes. All right, let me share my screen again. Okay, so like things like the skin. Now, typically I have a base skin color that I work with, and that's just because I'm comfortable with it since I've worked with it many times before. But here on the color picker, you can see where that lies. And since skin doesn't have like a set color, and that's why it's very vague on what color you should choose for skin, because it heavily depends on the skin type of the person and the lighting that's hitting it. So in this case, for I guess a more neutral, I use a very desaturated red-orange. So that's this color. And then when I choose my lighter values that I'm going to place on it, I'm going to go higher in saturation and in the brightness. And I'm going to bend it. I'm going to hue shift, like we talked earlier, more toward yellow. It might be a bit much. Let me put it like there. I'm going to do the same for my shadow. I'm going to go in the opposite direction and bend it more toward the red. And just in that step right there, let me show you what the same result would look like if I just went white and black for my shadow and my light. I'm going to bend it more toward white. So you should be able to see that there's more color play in the first one than there is in the second one that I created. Now, mind you, I would want to keep building this up further, because right now, oops, I'll go lighter. Because I'm not taking into account the highlight color, and I want, whenever I draw skin, I want there to be a plethora of color that I'm working with. I don't want to just use like 1 to 3 colors, unless if I'm going for more of a cell shaded look. When I'm going for more of a realistic, even if it was more fantastical, I want to add then more red hues. So I'm going to grab that skin color. make it more red, and I'm going to exaggerate it. So I'm going to make it very red, because then when I place it on the actual skin that I'm working on, I'll lay it on lightly. I won't like glop it on really heavily. So then I'll choose some variants around that. Oop. See, now that when I laid that down, it was grabbing so much of my attention that I wanted to now desaturate it a little bit, because I want it to stay somewhat in the same realm. So that works better to me than the other one. Then if I wanted to even push it further, maybe go back toward that skin color. And you can see I'm not going to the right side of my color picker. So if I laid down a super saturated color right now, it really should be an eyesore, especially when compared to the other colors. So when you're choosing your color palettes, the biggest thing that I want you guys to focus on, and there's even color pickers or color picker helpers, I should say, online, where essentially they have like a graph, and sometimes they're in triangles, sometimes they're in ovals, where you should stay within that range. So typically with all the stuff that I work on, I like working more desaturated. So all the colors that I'm picking will normally be left on the, if you like split this color picker down the center of saturation, I like working on the left side of saturation. And that's how I choose my colors. But for you and what you're working on, depending on what it is, you might want to work with more saturated. So even like the apple here, we're working with definitely more saturated colors. So it all depends. And I'll show you how when we work on the eye, I'm going to work with a more saturated blue and how it really complements the rest of the piece, because everything else is so desaturated that the eyes really grab your attention.
Do you tweak the opacity / flow of the brushes when you work, or do you just use the sensitivity of the tablet?
I just use the sensitivity of the tablet, but I don't want to say that that's the right way. If anything, I want to say whatever is most comfortable for you. So like if you like having the opacity down a bit and you really don't like it at 100%, then don't force it. There's no one right way to do it. The only right way to do it is what's most comfortable to you, and you get things done in an efficient manner. And another thing, when picking the actual eye ball color, so the sclera, I usually choose more of a neutral gray. I don't choose like a super prominent white. So usually I see this on like eye colors. I typically don't do that. I like to build up my value, so I stick with more of a neutral gray first and then build up the lights on top of that.
Eventually you'll hit this, but it says, question about painting hair color, natural, not dyed hair, has reflective qualities, right? How would you approach painting this reflective quality? Is it similar at all to how you'd paint reflective gold or metal?
It's similar in the idea, but in the execution, no. Just because the hair, you aren't trying to make it look super shiny or reflective like you would a metallic surface. So while it does have some reflective property to it, it's not like intensely reflective. And it really does vary by hair type. I actually think black hair is the easiest to work with, and then blonde or any lighter hair would be more on the hard scale of working with. Because with black, or even with like dark brown, let me go ahead and I'll do one little strip. Let's see here. Do it down here. So you can almost get away with, and this is something I usually don't recommend because I used to do this all the time when I was younger, where you can hide things in shadow. And with darker hair, you can usually hide detail in darker hair. So when I'm laying this down, usually start with more of a base first. And the other thing I think that bothers people when adding dark hair is you lose a lot of your line work. So you want to be conscious of when you're laying it down, that if you have line work that you're pretty proud of, lay the dark value soft enough where you can see the line art and you can then add those contours and work with the line art rather than just cover it up. Okay, so then for down here, usually I don't have it be highly reflective, and that's why I like working with black hair, but I think it's mainly because I think it's easier, which is not a good thing. So it's more of a comfort zone. So when I go down here, I'm gonna then choose, if this was our hair color here, I'm gonna choose what I call a pre-highlight and then a highlight color. So on my pre-highlight, I'm focusing on the angle at which the light would hit the hair. So usually where there's curves, not so much on the straight areas. Make my brush size smaller, give some more impression of the hair strands themselves. But if you do it too much, it might look like the hair was dyed that color. So that's why I have to be very careful with how much I'm adding. I actually probably should have done this on a new layer so that I could lower the layer's opacity here. Okay, so now with that pre-highlight in place, now I can grab my highlight color, create a new layer this time, make my brush size smaller, and lay it on pretty heavy. Now even this, if I do it too much, it might look a bit glossy. So that's why I think the pre-highlight was a tad too far down. So I'm going to grab that darker brown and cover some of it up. Now here I actually might want to add, right near the highlight, I'm going to add more of a pure brown. So something like that. And then I would do it everywhere, but that's if it was like more of a white bright light that was shining on her. If it was more of an overcast, I would keep it more neutral and the shine would be implied, but it would be very, very subtle. So something like this. And that's how I would typically work with adding light on hair.
Okay, it says, the Graceful Demon asks, I've read in James Gurney's Light and Color that the face has 3 colors, yellow for the forehead, red for the middle of the face, and blue for the jaw area. But the only result I get when I try to include these colors is a clown-looking face. Help?
Yes, so that is true. And I remember the first time I read that, I was a little baffled, but then the more I thought about it, the more it seemed accurate. So the blue for the lower part typically refers more to male faces because, yeah, when you add it to a female, let me go ahead and... Now, mind you, there is some overcast, and I think that's why it applies to female, but if you add it too much, it almost looks like a 5 o'clock shadow, or like they they need to shave, or they just shaved, and that's like the remnant of it. So if you're gonna add your blue to lower region, you want it to be very, very subtle, and especially with a female face, like that would be enough. So what I just added there, you can see the blue, but it's very, very subtle. And then for the middle of the face, this is I think the one that's more prominent, where areas that are the skin is closer to the blood cells themselves, they appear more fleshy in their tone. So like your nose, your cheek, your elbows, your knees, anything, or even your knuckles, any area that has the blood kind of pushed more toward the surface of the skin, you're going to get that result. Now the nose, it depends on a lighting scenario for sure, but also on the person to person. So if you make it too red, it'll look like they have a clown nose. So I think what James Gurney was saying, that you should be thinking of the color regions of the face, but use it very subtly. So don't really like push these colors on the foreground of your faces, or else they will look more clown-like in the final result.
I'm going to go to the bottom of the list. Oh, Matt wants to know about what's our QI question today.
I don't really have one in particular because I was so absorbed with trying to understand color. I couldn't think of a one before the stream started. But I guess if we could do one. Okay, I'm curious to know, what are your guys' favorite color? But you can't just put that, you have to put why it's your favorite color. And that's what I'd be more interested in hearing.
Tony asks, how do you create depth with color?
Typically with value, that's how you create the illusion of depth. But you could do it with just hue, and I can show you. All right, so let's say we wanted to add value to this orange sphere. Oops, I'm going to do that on a new layer. All right, so usually value, or the idea of depth is perceived with value, but you could kind of trick it into thinking there's value by just doing, let's say, saturation. So, oops, grab that color again. So let's just, the only thing that I'm changing is the saturation of it. Let's put it on the outer edge. And then for our light color, I'm only affecting the saturation and some in-betweens. So in this example, oops. Let me go ahead and see what that looks like desaturated. Oops, where's my orange? So you can see how even when you go completely on the same level of your saturation, you'll still get some value. So when you're working on your value or your saturation, there's an angle that you have to work at if you want it to remain the same value. And this is where it gets a little confusing, and I need to do more research on what that angle is, because then according to this, I would need to go on a darker value. Let's see if that gives us our same. Oh, no, I just added it. It's even deeper than that. I think it's something like this. It's something very strange to get that same level of saturation throughout. That's better. So we're getting there. I've almost found the line. But that's why when you're working with saturation, it's not a straight line left to right. There's like an angle that you really have to work with. But the other thing, I guess, really quick that I could show you, let's pick another new layer, is creating it with hue shifting. So literally, I'm not going to change the brightness or the saturation whatsoever. I'm only changing the hue. And this will look weird, but it gives somewhat of an impression of depth just through the gradient from one hue to the next. So then I'll do the same on this side. Let's see what that looks like. Oops, gotta merge it down. All right, so for the most part, it's a solid gray sphere, but when you look at it, it looks like there's an impression of a depth to it. So it's kind of tricking the eye where it really actually is the same value. It's only the hue that was shifting. So how do you create depth? Essentially through contrast, but most notably through value or brightness.
Divine asks, how do you keep the balance of warms and cools in your pieces?
Balance. I think when you're working, since I normally primarily work on characters, the skin usually has more of a warm like sensibility to it. So I'm aware that when I'm adding things on top, I think that's why I might drift more toward blues or purples as my accent colors, just because the skin generally produces more of a warm look to it. But in terms of balancing a piece as a whole, it's like if I went back to this piece, I was not only, it goes back to the idea of you have to balance the contrast of hue, saturation, and brightness. So for her, let me make it grayscale so it becomes easier to understand. So for her, there's obviously a huge contrast between her, the subject matter, and the background. And that's why oftentimes you'll see backgrounds that are more light with characters that are more in focus and with darker values, or the opposite, where the background will be very dark and the character themselves will almost have this glow to them because of the contrast. But there's some other areas like under the pants, and it gets really, I put this on a low res image, but under the pant leg here, rather than making this pant leg, let me go ahead and make a new layer. Rather than making this the same dark value that the pant probably should be on a more of a realistic scale, I wanted to play with the idea of balancing the purple hues with the yellow, and to get a really cool contrast that would kind of lead the eye down into this very point, this triangular point area down here. I chose purple's complement, which is like this orange yellow color. And when you're working on your piece, I wanted you guys to know it's okay to take liberties with adding things that aren't hyper realistic, because while there is an appreciation for artists that push as realistic as they possibly can make it, but I think sometimes as a composition or as an illustration, we need to think of it as an art piece rather than just someone that could have potentially just taken the picture with a camera. And that's where you add your own sensibilities of your understanding of color and what you want to add to the piece. Go ahead and push that away. And I guess the other thing is stick, and this is something that Aqua Sixio taught me when I was first learning digital art, is try to find one pair of complementary colors and let that be the dominant focus of your piece. So in this one, even though I have a slew of a lot of other colors, you might notice that I really don't have any greens, and the primary complements in this are the purple and yellow or the orange and blue. And for me, I think more yellow and purple just because of how much is going on down here. But then if the sky is more yellow down there and then the top half is more blue, it's like a double complement. So with the subject matter in the foreground, it's purple yellow. But then with the background elements, it's yellow blue. And actually it's more purple orange in the foreground and then yellow blue in the background. So be very aware of the colors you're choosing. And if you're working primarily with one color, just know in the back of your mind, what is its complement? And then maybe somehow include that somewhere in the piece. It doesn't have to be overbearing. If anything, it works better when it's more subtle, and be sure to try to add that.
There's two questions that, but I'll ask this first one, and I'll find the other one. It says, why is Red's back leg yellow?
That was what I talk about, taking the artistic liberty, and I wanted to add more interest to the composition itself. So kind of like what you were saying, it should be this darker purple based on the lighting scenario I have, and then the top half of this would be the purple as well, and it fades into that darker. And that's fine. We could go for more of a realistic look, but for what I wanted to do was to add more interest to the actual piece as a composition rather than looking at it as just a realism study. And that's where I think I can have more fun with color, because sometimes we restrict ourselves so much to realism that we don't allow the piece to be as interesting as it possibly can be without it losing that realistic sensibility. So I want my, when I'm working, I try to keep my pieces more realistic in the terms of rendering, but then with colors, I want to take more of an imaginative approach with how I'm approaching my color work. So you're right. When I'm working in a realistic sense, the back leg should not be yellow, or the back pant leg should not be yellow.
Namtaru, who is my friend Dave, says, "Hurrah! I made it! Greetings from the cornfields." Hives.
Hello, welcome.
Who? Oh, this is the fun one. Who's your favorite Muppet?
Ooh, I really like the drummer. I think that's Animal.
Yeah.
I think I always have an affinity for Kermit. Who is the brown dog? Does he play the saxophone? I like him too.
That's Ruff.
I like Ruff. Yeah, those would be my three favorite.
Yeah. Or yeah, Ralph.
Ralph.
My favorite is, it's a tie between Beaker and Swedish Chef, just because when I'm cooking, I usually do a Swedish Chef voice because I think it's just fun to do. And Beaker because he's adorably cute and he always blows up. He always gets blown up. Like he's the guinea pig. And I guess it's because they don't talk. Like those characters don't talk at all. They don't speak English, but you can tell how good, like their personalities are so good because they don't need to talk. They just make random noises. What's your favorite character design in any video game, movie, or TV show?
Oh, mine's gonna sound so cliche and dumb, but I've always loved it. I think just because of how borderline ridiculous it's like, almost it's a commentary on itself. But Cloud from Kingdom Hearts, that design I think is so wonderful for so many reasons. But at the same time, I think it is borderline ridiculous and a commentary about how ridiculous fantasy costumes have gotten in like the last 10, 15 years.
I actually just read that about an Avatar. Remember the episode where Aang goes to go train, or Sokka's getting trained by the one guy, by the Swordmaster.
Yeah.
And then Aang comes out with like this full blown armor suit, and it looks ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's the same idea where I guess they were the creators were talking about how much difficulty they were having with the toy line at the time because they wanted to keep adding armor to Aang. And it was like, no.
That doesn't make sense at some point. It really doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Or didn't Aang have like, he looked like Goku at one time when he was having a dream?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Canvas Roses asks, what are your brush settings? My Photoshop paintings always look streaky or too airbrushed.
Typically, I work with a soft edge, a hard edge, and then a chalk brush. It really does vary. I don't like saying like I only use one brush in particular, and I don't want you guys getting comfortable with only using one brush. I think it's good to become sufficient with a few brushes in particular, but never feel like you have to rely on one brush to do every specific area. Like with the skin, I almost want to use this skin brush that I created to get more of that porous texture look. But then when I'm doing the hair, I don't want the porous texture look. I would rather go for my hard edge or do the soft edge and then clean up the edges from that point forward. So usually the basic brushes with 100% opacity, and then I have transfer turned on. I don't have shape dynamics turned on. Okay, so I could keep rendering this for like the next hour, but since I want to kind of show what we're doing here, I didn't use black for any of the shadows. And I want, even though I wish I had more time to render this, we only have like 20 minutes left, and I want to show the red example as well. But the meaning behind this was I didn't use black for any of the shadow or value areas in the face itself, But then when we go to our hue and saturation, we turn it all the way down, we still get the subtle values. And that's what we're looking for. So I don't want to blow out the color identity, or else you might not even be able to tell the skin from the highlight from the shadow. And you want the skin to be more prominent, and then have the highlights be more isolated and well placed, and then have the shadows just complement the forms. And what's also cool about putting everything in this desaturated mode is you can see how the skin color that I'm using is very close to the background color. And you can see that from the edge on the sides of the skin color. And then when I desaturate it, it's very, very close to that mid-tone gray. So that's why I work more on a neutral scale, because then if I want to make her eyes really vibrant and bright and maybe push the viewer's attention to them, it'll be really, really easy. And that's what I'm going to do right now as we go ahead and answer some more questions.
Carlos West asks, what do you do to get out of your comfort zone?
I scream and fight inside my head when I don't want to do something, especially like right now. Like this morning, or even I should say last night, I was up till about 3:30 a.m. in my bed, like on my laptop, just like pushing colors and mixing them because I was so frustrated that I couldn't understand color. And I felt like working with color was a comfort zone, and then to be pushed to my limit where it's like, no, you don't know what you're doing with color, that made me uncomfortable. And so since that was no longer my comfort zone, you have to work through it. I think there's no sense in kind of like giving up on things that you're not comfortable with, or just like pushing it aside because you're not familiar with it. I think you have to dive in first, and you'll get frustrated. Even this morning, I was showing Joe, I got frustrated trying to figure out how to pull the RGB channels out from an image. And I have to go to YouTube. I have to go to Google search, DeviantArt, wherever I have to go to find these tutorials, and I have to teach myself. And if it was easy, it wouldn't be worth doing. So if it was easy, everyone would do it. So like if understanding color is something that you're uncomfortable with, or if you feel uncomfortable working with color, then do your research on it. Really push yourself to try to understand it. And just know if you're not comfortable, if you're having a hard time, that's a good thing. That means that your mind is trying to wrap the concept around in your head, and it's going to continue doing that until at some point it'll just click. There'll be a moment where you have like a revelation, an aha moment, and then from that point forward, you'll always know how to work whatever it is that you learned. You'll always have that in your mind to pull from. And I think as artists, we got to continually do that over and over and over again as we go throughout our career, because otherwise then we're doing what I always talk about, and you settle into recycling your own skill level. There is no growth. And that's why sometimes with our favorite artists, there's times where we do get a little disappointed because we've seen it before. We've already seen what they've created, and you can just tell that they've hit a plateau where they're not growing as an artist. They're just rehashing what they know will work. And it's a weird balance. It's a weird balance of finally feeling comfortable with where you're at, and then that other side being like, well, no, you should continue pushing yourself as an artist, because you won't grow if you become complacent with where you're at currently.
I totally had that aha moment earlier today. Yeah, because like I don't like doing frilly things, and that's why I struggle with hair a lot. And so I was like, okay, well, how can I start this off? So I started doing like frills, like just legit frills, or like skirts and stuff, like for clothing. And then I started drawing it, and I'm like, wait a second, this is a bullet casing like belt. You know how like heavy weapons guys have like those like bullet casings across their what's it called? Their chest. The it starts with a B. But anyway, they have those a bandolier. You know the bandoliers?
Yeah.
So I'm like, and then it blew my mind. I was like, this is just frills. I was like, you know?
Right? And we're going to continue to have those moments over and over and over again. That's the fun of it.
I was going to say, I usually come down every couple weeks. I'm like, Jim, My brain just exploded.
I feel like that's what I was doing to you this morning. It's like,
Yeah.
Joe, learn something new.
It's so much fun though.
Oh yeah. Oh, you know what? I was gonna do what not to do on the eyes. Okay. So I was doing what to do on the eyes, but before I do that, if we really wanted eyes that were super demanding and very saturated blue, rather than just going to our blue palette, choosing something very saturated and then laying it down on the eye. Now, sometimes you'll see this, especially with like movie posters. Sometimes with like horror movies, it's like the villain and you can just see their eyes. Yeah, it does create an effect, I guess, but it's one of those that I feel have been done before and it's almost become so cliche that I want you guys to avoid doing it. But so rather, if I was doing more of a actual concept of this character for an illustration, work with more of a desaturated blue first, and then build up the saturation on the bottom edge. Because typically our light source is going to be overhead, so the iris would catch this brilliant blue on the bottom. But if you keep it more isolated, it doesn't become as demanding or as much of an eyesore as the other one did. And even with this eye, I feel like the saturation is pushing it a bit much. So I can still go higher on my brightness scale, but maybe just push it lower on the saturation. Because I imagine this character with lighter blue eyes, but I don't want the eyes to be so unnatural looking that it appears like fake contacts or something that is more of an unrealistic scale.
We just have so many questions still. But
Right,
I'm gonna throw out. Dennis Brown asks, "I'm having issues with analogous and complementary color palettes. Should I really restrict myself to those hues with different saturation, or use all hues, but make sure the palette hues are the most showcased colors?"
I think the best thing I read this morning was you should never feel like you have to limit yourself. I think there's recommended things you can do in creating palettes, but the one thing you should never do is feel like you're restricted. Because then if your vision is to see certain colors used on the piece, but you're like, well, it's not in the palette that I'm being restricted to, then I have mixed feelings about that because then it's like, well, then you push yourself to learn to use new colors, but at the same time, you need to explore why do you want this color in the piece, and then maybe if you over time you'll like push those colors that you do want in your piece, and then you'll realize, oh, I can see why maybe the colors I was choosing weren't the colors that are more in harmony with one another. So I think it's good to experiment, and if you feel restricted, ask yourself why. So let me read the second half of the question. How to make sure the palette hues are the most showcase colors. So it's usually by contrast. So like the blue is obviously contrast because there's nothing else that's cool in the piece right now. It's all warm, and that's one of the contrasts. Two, it's complementary to the skin tone. And then three, it's the brightest in saturation and arguably in value. So that's why the attention is being focused on the eye. So when you're working with, if you want a specific hue to stand out more than others, push the contrast around it and maybe make the areas around it more desaturated. I think the worst thing that you can do is to make something more saturated to bring attention to it, because that's when your piece starts to become more unrealistic or more of an eyesore, because then the saturations become overblown everywhere. I think it's good to learn that adding gray to your piece can actually make, or not actually, it does make the other colors in your piece more vibrant, because the addition of that gray is so neutral that then the other colors surrounding it become more vibrant. Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone on silent. And of course, it's my mom forgetting that I do live streams every Wednesday. Okay, so when I lean back and I look at the piece, so even though I really wanna just continue rendering and cover up some of the line work that I have initially, you can see how the intention of the eye and what we tried to do. So let me show the before eye. So this is the first eye, and then if you wanted to add if you really wanted to make it more realistic looking, you'd have the black in the center. But you can see how the blue, it doesn't work with the piece at all. It's very clashing, and it doesn't so much speak or have a relationship with the colors around it. It's almost like bowling the other colors around it. It's like, no, I want the viewer to only look at me. Where then if we look at more of a subtle blue, you can see how it still it demands attention, but in a way that works with the other colors. So the other colors are like, okay, blue, you can have your spotlight, and here, we'll complement you to make you even look better. And that's a working relationship between colors. Okay, so now I'm gonna head over, switch this one, and then we'll do a bit of red experimenting here. Okay, what other question do we got?
Well, when you had the eyes like at that super blue, my immediate thought was like evil.
Yep.
I was
Movie
like,
poster evil.
you White Walker, you.
Yeah.
Eon asks, for painting skin, what brush do you normally use?
See, this is another thing where I don't just have one brush that I use. So like right now, I had a soft opacity or a soft edge brush open, and I'm just gonna use it because I'm in the groove already. I'm not relying on the meticulous nature of what I used to do, where I would be like, okay, I'm gonna work on skin, now I have to use the skin brush. Sometimes you have to do what feels right and just go with the flow. I feel like the pieces that I create when I'm just going with my intuition, they turn out so much better, and the process is so much more enjoyable than when I feel like I have to restrict myself. Because remember, it's not the artist, it's not the tools that make the piece, it's the artist that makes the tools work. So rely on yourself, and if you want more texture on your skin, then use a texture brush. If you want it to be more smooth, or if you want it to be more flat coloring or animated, then use a soft edge brush or a hard edge brush. Okay, so let's see. For red, first thing I'm going to do, and this is how so this is my process on how I would normally color something. If I wasn't trying to go crazy with my color schemes, just a very basic color theme here. Let me bend it. I'm going to draw red's hair. Or color, I should say. Color red's hair. So like right here, I'm going to go to a hard edge brush. Or no, you know what? I'm still going to stick with a soft edge because I'm not going to care if I go outside of the lines. So immediately I can see, okay, the red values, I'm not getting enough of a range to get into those shadow areas. So I'm going to add this darker red, this darker value red, and then even one more for areas that I really want to push those ambient shadows. And then when I'm doing this part, I'm just going to lightly touch on where those shadows would be prevalent, but I'm not going to over push them yet. All right, make a new layer. Grab this lighter value red. And since I'm going to have the light coming from the front, I'm going to have the hair reflect that more in the front area, where she has like this pulled back mohawk thing going on. And when doing hair, I try to keep it a little irregular. So sometimes with my brush strokes, I just let my hand move more freely, because sometimes those irregularities capture more of the look of a realistic hairstyle than if you make everything perfectly consistent with each other. Because sometimes that would result in hair that becomes more cartoony looking, but that might be the result you're looking for too. Like any animated movie, like a Pixar or a Disney or Blue Sky, like they have hair that typically is very smooth and rendered out. I guess recently they really are pushing for more of a realistic look with more of like a shaping to the hair. But for the most part, it still has that very, very smooth look to it. Okay, so then you can see what that did. Now we're going to go one more. And now, wherever I color in, so I'm going to go one more up. And now, when I color on top of what I already have done, rather than almost repeating what I just did, I'm going to work even more isolated in the area that I just worked on. So now we're pushing our saturations and we're isolating the brightnesses to minimal sections of the hair rather than it being all over. And this is why it creates such a cool contrast between not only value, but then through saturation and hue as well. All right, sorry, if we're getting any more questions, let me answer a few.
Okay, Dave T says, hello from Lithuania. About the contest, are you guys going to be judging the piece from a realistic point of view? For example, a big guy carries a lot of stuff and a small guy carries not so much stuff, like in the real world, or could it be surrealistic?
It could be surreal. I wouldn't say surreal. I'd say that's more like animated. But yeah, no, we're not. I don't want. That's why even with the stream today, I don't want things to only be focused on realism. Because while I think I have a personal appreciation for learning how to do realism, I think concepts can be not only as strong but stronger when they're more animated and more dynamic, where they wouldn't fit in a realistic context. So yeah, go crazy, have fun with it. And if you guys have no idea what we're talking about, CG Cookie is hosting a contest right now that you can enter. It's free to enter. It's for anyone. You don't even have to be a citizen member. And you could win $200 if you win the top prize. And the contest subject matter is an apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic character. And that could be male, female, whatever you want, but just showcase that we have a survivor really that's living in a post-apocalyptic setting. And it can either be concept or illustration.
And if you need ideas,
watch
Mad Max.
Which comes out on September 1st.
Yes.
All rights reserved.
Gotta love you, George Miller. My poor George Miller. Wait, so the next question I think I can answer. Dasha Anchor says, hi, I'm a young artist and there's a lot of artists I like to learn from, and I'm trying to develop a style of my own, but cannot choose which style or what kind of art to choose, realistic or cartoony. Should I try to merge the styles or something else? What I was going to say is you can, for your own style, it'll eventually become, like when you study from all these other artists, it'll evolve into your own style because you draw in your own specific way. It's kind of like this idea of you could really, really love Tim's work right now, and you can try your entire life to try to draw like Tim, but you'll never draw like Tim because Tim draws like Tim. So as far as...
Or would you want to draw like me? I feel like you'd want your sense of identity through your work.
Well, that's what we'd hope for.
That's what we'd hope for. But I'd feel like you as the artist wouldn't feel satisfied if you felt like your art looked like someone else's.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing with anime is when people try to hit that style, it's this idea of, I'm drawing anime, and then when it looks, the problem is you can't determine what artist drew what because it looks so similar. But then the artist that I like Yoshida, the guy who does the concept art for Final Fantasy, you can tell that that's his style, even though it is anime, but you know that it's him. And it's like same with he does Kim Jong-yi. He doesn't do anime necessarily, but it's still of a Asian culture, like you can tell.
I'm trying to think. What's the studio that made Gurren Lagann and not Fooly Cooly or Kill la Kill? Like even though it's anime, you can tell that studio did that. because it has a specific style to it.
Yeah, that was Trigger.
Trigger, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really important is, especially when you're trying to choose a style, I guess, is pull from the things you love and then add yourself to it, because that's what's gonna make you pop out. You know, I think that's why I love art so much when it comes to looking at artists and being like, oh man, this, Lolis did this really awesome piece and she does really amazing color, and man, I would really love to pull that. And you can say that she was inspired by Disney, by a lot of the way that stuff looks, but it's definitely not,
Mm-hmm.
So try merging styles, but then don't ever try to be someone else.
Yeah, and don't force it. I feel like it really does come naturally. So experiment as much as you want, but just know in the back of your head that it will develop on its own. Oof. Okay. And for her head, since I don't want it to look like she's wearing a purple cap, I want some of that skin color to bleed through. I'm just going to grab my eraser tool and lay it down. And that's how I would draw Red's hair. Oh, geez, we're already at 3:30.
I know, and we have so many.
Should I do, or should we extend this one by like 10 minutes and get through some more questions? Because I felt kind of bad because I was talking throughout most of it. Maybe let's keep working on Red and then just answer questions.
Yeah, keep working on Red. I'll throw questions your way.
All right.
It's Tomas says, hi, Joe and Tim. Every time I try to make some piece very bright and colorful, saturated, at the same time, examples, paintings from Benjamin Zhang Bin, my painting starts to look, I don't know, dirty is the word. Happy Potato Day.
Happy Potato Day. I didn't even realize it was Potato Day. I'm going to put potatoes tonight. Let's see here. Dirty. I think the word that you might be talking about is muddy, where when you blend too many colors together, you can get a brown look. And I guess actually this would be kind of fun to show you guys really quick. Okay, so let's show. Where's my? Yes. Okay. Like I was saying before, there's a traditional color wheel and then there's a modern color wheel. The modern color wheel, you're going to see, this is a lot of my exploration this morning with color. But if you can imagine it, I'll do a quick one down here. It's a little different than what we're used to. All right, so on the traditional color wheel, red and green are not opposites, but rather red and cyan. And green is actually opposite of magenta, and then blue and yellow, not blue and orange. And trust me, I'm not trying to confuse you, but this is the modern digital wheel, just because of how what I'm about to show you explains what complementary really is. So when two complementary colors are next to each other, they create the greatest amount of contrast. And when mixed together, they should cancel each other out. So to better show that, let me show you guys this little test that I made earlier. All right, so the top row is opposite of the lower row. So I'm going to change the opacity of the top row to 50%. And now, when I pull this layer down, the colors that we would initially think would mix between like red and cyan or blue and yellow or green and magenta might be more dirty or muddy. But what's really cool, and you can do this experiment yourself, when you push them over each other, they actually create the same color. And what that color is if we look on our color picker, is a complete 100% neutral gray. And it's crazy to think that, because sometimes when we think when mixing colors that it'll always create either a darker shade or a lighter tint of that color. But when in reality, if you have two colors that are perfectly opposite of each other, and I say perfectly vaguely because I'll go into that later, but they should cancel each other out and create a gray. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I found that out yesterday. I did this little test and did it. So if your paintings are looking muddy, it's probably because you're working with colors that you may think are complementary, but aren't. Because if you tried mixing like a red and a green in the same way we did here, and it was the same experiment, the red and green actually don't produce a perfect gray, but rather more of like a brown, a muddy color. And that's why it might look dirty for you. All right, next. I'll try to get through as many as we can. I feel bad that we didn't get too many questions.
Are there certain colors you should avoid when painting?
Once again, that's relative. I guess on a personal level, this yellow down here frustrates the heck out of me. For some people, it's weirdly enough, and I've heard this on more than one occasion. Let me see if I can find it. It's mint. Mint seems to be a weird color for people. Neon yellow, and then what was the other color?
I hate pink.
Hate pink?
Yeah, I can't work with pink.
Oh, I like pink. Or this color, where it's like a almost, I don't want to say like baby puke or baby poop.
Baby food green.
So those are the three colors that are often avoided, or just from my personal experience talking with artists. But yeah.
Actually, can you throw that color down again? I think that's the same color of the stuff you make with the NutriBullet.
That's so true. Yeah.
Mad00 says, hello there. I wanted to ask about choosing colors with colored lighting. I mean, simply, how does colored lighting affect overall skin tones and colors overall? I always get confused and my painting looks off. Did we already talk about this?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, but essentially, kind of like the rock show, when you have a blue light pointing on a person, their skin appears blue. But you know, just because you know what skin looks like, that their skin color isn't blue. It's just the way that we're receiving the light information. But in our mind, we're still able to analyze it and understand that it's still skin, it's just blue light. That is one of the biggest challenges, is put your character in, like, even if I was working on this red character profile, and then if I was like, well, what if I really wanted a really heavy blue light coming from the front for whatever reason? So then I would work with this as my base. I would even put it over the hair. And I would work with that as my base. So I would work almost the entire process the same. It would just be a different foundation color that I'm working with. And then, like, if she had green eyes, I can't just select a green and then lay it in on there. I have to find a balance between how would blue reflect the green on the iris. So it might be very, very subtle. Actually, I don't even think that's subtle enough. It'd be very, very light, where it would almost still be primarily blue. So when working with a colored light on your piece, you have to be very, very conscious of how you're doing that.
Really fast. I think her name was Emma Yates. Yeah, Emma Yates says, hi from San Francisco. So excited I made it. How large do you usually keep your canvas? No matter how large I make mine, stuff always looks super pixelated, especially for stuff like eyes.
Actually, to be honest, I really shouldn't be zooming in this much. It's kind of a bad representation of how I actually work. I try to stay like this zoomed out at all times. When I'm doing a profile bust like this, I try to zoom in a little bit just because it's so focused on the detailing of the face. But like when you're getting this crazy focused on the eye, I think you need to pull back, because this is very inefficient. And you might be like thinking, well, I want to make it as highly detailed as possible. But when the viewing angle of it is this far away, unfortunately, a lot of those details that you're adding will be lost, and the viewer won't even see the extra hard work that you put into it. So be aware of how the viewer is going to see your piece, and whatever that viewing angle is, try to only zoom in like once or twice and no more. So don't zoom in super crazy close, because then that will get lost on the viewer looking at it.
But what resolution do you work at? And what size?
300.
300?
300 resolution, just because I never know when I'm going to create something for print, so I always have that ready to go. And then in terms of the sizing, minimum, I would say I try to work at a 10-inch minimum either way, vertical or horizontal.
Okay. Oh man, there's like two good questions. I guess if you guys have questions about the contests, feel free to go to the go to the community website because that's where the post is at.
Community.cookie.com.
Yeah, and then go and post the question on there, and then we usually we answer the questions on that post.
Yeah.
I think this will be the last question that I'll ask. I don't know if there's going to be questions that you're going to want to skim through. Pam asks, I'm a traditional artist, mainly watercolor. I think I'm in the upper newbie intermediate stage. Should I buy a tablet and start learning digital at the same time, or will it just confuse me to learn so much at once?
No, I really do think learning both at the same time is the best way to go about it. I could just be personally biased just because I feel like the artists that I know, and even through my own experiences, I guess, it seems to really complement each other. When you learn something in one, you're able to pull from that in the other, and you're really able to strengthen rather than one medium, you're able to strengthen two at the same time. So I would say yes. I would get your tablet and start having fun with digital art.
Okay, start scanning through these.
All right, let's see here. Question about oops. We just did the. Benedict's asking about, since you read Color and Light, what are your thoughts on the mud debate? Anything that particularly related to traditional pigment mixing, I skipped over just because for the course, I wanted to get as much information as I could before I started recording, and I didn't feel like that was relevant enough to the course itself. So eventually I will go back and read the entirety of it. Even I've been talking to Joe on how I wish there was like an audio book, even though I know it doesn't make sense because it's a visual learning book, but I want to just listen to it over and over again to really let the ideas sink in. How do you communicate different moods with color? So this is something where you could even do research on, like, what does red, like, what do people associate red with? What do people associate green and blue with? And literally there isn't one answer, because you can find so many different ideas on, like, what does yellow mean? To someone, yellow might be energy. To some other person, it might mean spontaneous. It varies from person to person. So I guess the best way to work with color and how to communicate mood is, how does that color relate to you? And that's another thing of how you can put your personal touches and your style into your work, where, like, even with my work, there are certain colors I probably will never use. And I stick with my own palettes, and I feel like I've created those over the years just based on palettes that I find attractive and I'm drawn into for some reason. And you gotta acknowledge those and really play with those in your pieces. How do you go about drawing dark skin and adding shading and highlights to it? I can't seem to find the right colors without making it look weird. I think dark skin is actually more fun to work with, just because you can play with more of the cooler colors, like more purple tones into the actual skin color itself. And if you're having a hard time choosing the colors, look at reference and pull from those colors, but also alter those colors that you're picking as well. Because sometimes the highlights are either not, they're either overblown or they're not enough to really emphasize a highlight on skin. And don't go too crazy with your range on a darker skin, where if they do have like a rich, dark chocolate color to their skin, let the value range be smaller and let the highlights kind of do the value speaking for it, rather than trying to go crazy with like a huge range of light and dark values. Someone asked, do you work out, Tim? The answer is maybe. Let's see here. Someone's asking, I have a problem with finishing, always working to it to death. I guess my question is your metric for when to stop. This is something I think that's probably one of my biggest problems as an artist, is I always overwork a piece. And I could actually show you a perfect example because I can't seem to finish it no matter how many times I work on it. I think this is the right file. It's this one. I've been working on this for way too long and I can't seem to finish it. And it's a good and a bad thing. Good thing because then there's things that I realize on it that I want to change. Like, let me see if I can find. So like in the middle here, I had the light source like coming from overhead and to the left, but the light didn't make sense to me and why it would fall here if it was landing here, where in reality, it should have been, the shadow should have covered this area here. So then I painted over it, redid the lighting, and now it makes more sense to me where then the arm would be casting the shadow all throughout onto this top part of the pant area. So then the highlight should be on this side. And the reason that you might have a hard time finishing is because you're doing a piece that is consisting over a large period of time. And over that period of time, you're learning so much about, at least if you're practicing every day, you're learning so much about art and relationships of color or working in value or how lighting works, that every time you learn something new, you almost feel like you have to go back to your piece that you're working on and add what you learned to it. And even with this one, I'm going to redo all the plants on either side because I want it to have more of a lighting feel to it the way that I did on the boy himself. And it's frustrating, but try your best not to get caught into what I call over rendering a piece or overworking it. And I border on that all the time, and it can lead to you're driving yourself crazy because you just want to finish it, but at the same time you want to be proud of it. And finding that balance between those two can be extremely frustrating, but just know that happens. And if you're really getting to the point where it's like bothering you immensely, work on a new piece. That's what I did. I put this piece away like I always do, and then I work on a new piece. And I know I'll come back to it eventually, but I think that right now, the things that I want to add to it, I haven't learned, or I feel like I'm not at that skill level yet. So I'm going to pull it back up when I feel like I'm at that capability of doing it. All right. Let me see here. Do I blend with small circular movements with my pen? Typically, yes. What is your favorite Pokemon by design, Snorlax, and worst? Ooh. I would say almost any of the new ones, especially the key and the trash one. What is in Red's case? I'm not going to say. It's really funny reading what your favorite colors are and why. I'm going to read through all of these once the stream ends. Someone's asking, when will you do more traditional streams? I believe it's one of the best types of streams, and it's pretty unique since the style is extremely epic. Well, thank you, Alex. Usually, like once a month, I'll do a traditional one, I think. Do I use the mixer brush tool? I do, and I agree with you. I think it's amazing. Do you have any good pieces that are nothing but food? I'm going to be doing a series where the land is nothing but different foods, and I was hoping you could point me in some inspiration. I always like looking at fan art of things that I already know kind of are associated with that. So in your case, like Candyland would be awesome. Even Wreck-It Ralph, some of the new stuff with Sugar Rush game. To that random guy 65, that's awesome that you power walked from a school movie festival event just to see this, which is 2 kilometers away. That's awesome. Did you and Joe come up with your artist signature, or was that a deliberate process, or was that one that came over time? I feel like that one came very much over time for me, very organically.
Signature?
Like how you sign your pieces.
Oh, no, that changes for me constantly.
I think it's good though to like practice it or like think about it, but then don't like overkill yourself being like, what is my signature going to be? Actually, I take that back. I don't even sign my pieces anymore. Okay. Man, there are a lot of questions. I think I'm going to try to pick maybe one more. Oh, someone's asking, well, what are your guys' favorite color and why? So you can go first as I look through here.
What is my favorite color?
And why?
Oh, God. I really like cyan. It's probably like a light blue cyan color. I don't know why. I think it's, I don't know if that's because like the room that I grew up in maybe was that color, like when I was a baby, or I really like deep forest green. But then I also really enjoy red because I feel like if I wear like a red color, it just feels good. Like red and black to me are like great color schemes.
It is a great color scheme. Actually, yeah, building on that, red is my favorite color. Although I feel like now it's bordering on gold or gray, but I'll always have a special place in my heart for red. And I think it's the boldness that red carries with it. And even what Joe was saying with the black and red design, like you see it everywhere. And even like in fashion, those, well, if you guys aren't that familiar with fashion, you might not know this, but one of the, if not the most famous shoe is called a Christian Louboutin shoe. And it's black on the outside. And then the heel, the bottom of the shoe is red. And it's a power symbol for women when they wear that. And I think that it's just one of those things, another instance of how the color red can really carry such a weight with its bold use. Someone's asking, are we part of the Illuminati? And the answer is, of course. Yes, the contest will be on the community page. And I think that's all the ones we're going to answer for today. Because I got to get back to recording this color course for you guys. So if this stream interested you, just know we're working up a full course. I know it's probably hard to see, but we're going to have about 14 tutorials, 14 to 17, based on trying to understand color. And I'm trying to break it down as much as possible. So that's why I am doing everything here in my power to understand it to the best of my ability so I can share with you guys what I've learned. And hopefully we can kind of grow a deeper understanding of color together. So look for that. If not, it's going to come out in the next few weeks. I'm not sure when. It kind of depends on when I feel comfortable teaching each section of the tutorial. So I got to kind of teach myself first, but look for that. And the other thing is the contest is still going on, and it'll be going on to the first weekend of September. So look for that. And lastly, if any of you are in the Chicago area, I will be at Wizard World Convention, and I will have my own booth there. So you should come say bye or stop by and say hi. And I think that's everything from my end and what's going on with CG Cookie. What about you, Joe?
I started on the community forums. There's now a category that I'm creating. It's called sketchbooks. If what I would love for you guys, it's every night I'm going to be doing a sketchbook post, probably around midnight to 1 o'clock, of the work that I did that day, and it's just to keep my track progress to make sure that I'm growing as an artist, so that way I can scroll up and be like, okay, this is where I started, this is where I'm at now. And I encourage everyone who's watching right now to make a sketchbook on the forums and update daily with me. I would love that, because then I can see your progress, and then people can critique and make comments and stuff. So if you could do that, if you're an artist out there, go for it. I would love to see what you guys can do.
Awesome. All right, well, that's all I got. I'm going to go ahead and eat my Subway. So thank you guys for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next week, Wednesday.
God, I'm starving.
Right.
Bye, guys.